April 2022 was a long month for Kenyans because of the chaos that was brought about by the fuel crisis. As always, no long-term solution, just patchwork, pointing fingers, blame games, and threats. I'm going to do an analysis of all the factors working together that culminated into this crisis. I'll do it in two parts so that it's not too long, but make sure you watch the videos in the order that I post them. My name is Susan Wanjiku. I'm the founder of wanjikuseyeke. And here I discuss the relationship between economic development and governance so that you can understand, engage, and influence the matters that affect you and I. Welcome to wanjikuseyeke. Let's begin, and I want you to understand the context of the issue holistically, keeping one thing in mind, that this is a fight between oil marketing companies, also known as the OMCs, and the government, because the government owes them some money. OMCs are the likes of Shell, Total Energies, Rubies, and then we also have other small independent players. So the question we want to answer here is, why does the government owe these people money? Now, before I break it down, I want to begin with the explanation that the government gave as their defense, which will clear the air on some issues. Now, when there were clear signs that there was a problem with the supply of fuel, as you saw with the long queues, the first line of defense that the government gave was that the Russia-Ukraine war was the one that was responsible for causing this shortage. And that's an easy answer for the government to fall back on because, it's not in their control as the government of Kenya that there's a shortage internally in the country because of the war that's happening in another country, right? Wrong. And how can we confirm this? One reason is that the Kenya pipeline was the first to respond a day after it emerged that there was an issue with the supply of fuel. And they said that we have more than enough stock. And this is something that they have repeatedly stated. So watch this.
The only thing I can assure Your Excellency is that Kenya pipeline is full of product. I don't know where to take it. As we sit here, I have 200 million liters of PMS. I have 160 million liters of diesel, and I have 60 million liters of jet seated. I have Ashirami who is seated in front of you, delivering 120 million liters of super petrol. Then I have a vessel which is also waiting to deliver jet, 120 million in about 2 days. Then Ashirami comes back to deliver another 120 million of super. I don't know where to take it if we don't resolve this matter. So KPC, we are so wet. The country has all the product it requires for the next 1.5 months before I receive anything else. Thank you.
With that out of the way, I'll get back to the war issue as we proceed. So later, the Permanent Secretary of Petroleum and Mining, Andrew Kamau, came out and blamed it on panic buying. That you guys speculated that there was a shortage and decided to fill your tanks. And in fact, he ridiculed some of you in the process that Garizenu hata hazijai on a full tank until this incident happened. And because of the panic buying, the oil marketing companies or the oil marketers weren't able to restock quickly enough. And that was what was causing the crisis. But again, back to the question, why weren't they able to restock quickly enough? Because they didn't have enough cash for logistics and operations. Why? Again, because the government owes them money. So see what he had to say about that.
The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority on Saturday said there's sufficient supply in the country. Kenya Pipeline says they have sufficient supply in the depots. The oil marketing company is saying we are experiencing some challenges because of operating capital, and so on and so forth. But bon appears, the headlines today are basically just showing that there is some issue with fuel supply. What's the issue?
Eric, you've seen what in the past what are called financial runs, where something spooks people.
Yep.
And they head out to their bank to get all their money. Yeah. So what happens? You go there. Maybe you are the first person. You get your money. When you're the 10,000th person, they say, no, the bank is closed. We are not giving more money. So what happens? Another 100,000 people show up to try and get their money out of the ATM. That's what's called a run. And that's exactly what is happening now. So, most people, their cars have never seen a full tank. Let's just say that. All of a sudden, their cars are full. They even brought jerry cans.
To store extra.
Yes. You saw that. You've seen the pictures.
Yep.
People are queuing up with jerry cans.
And this statement, in addition to the remarks by the managing director of Kenya Pipeline, exposed the cracks in the government's defense. I'll discuss the crisis within the context of just 3 issues without touching on the theories of who owns what. And I'll begin with the components of the price of fuel. So what makes the price of fuel? Meaning, what exactly do you pay for when you are buying your fuel? So in Kenya, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, which is the government, sets the price of fuel in Kenya. So when you pay for fuel in Kenya, you're paying for the actual cost of fuel, 9 taxes, and the profit margins that the oil marketing companies will earn. So just so we are clear, the price of fuel in Kenya is not determined by the forces of demand and supply. It's set by the government. So there's also this misconception that the OMCs are the ones making the fuel expensive, but I'll show you that that's not true. For instance, this was a release by EPRA breaking down the cost of petrol, diesel, and kerosene for the month of 15th February 2019 to 14th March 2019. So let's look at petrol, for example. Petrol was sold to you at 100 Kenya shillings per litre, and out of that, 41 Kenya shillings was the actual cost, 44 Kenya shillings was taxes, and the oil marketing companies made 10 Kenya shillings, and then 3 Kenya shillings went to storage and distribution. So you paid more in taxes than in the actual cost of the product. And also, let's get to the price of fuel for the month of November 2021 to December 2021. Again, looking at petrol, it was sold to you at 129 Kenya shillings per litre, and out of that, 67 Kenya shillings was the actual cost, 58 Kenya shillings was taxes, 3 Kenya shillings went to storage and distribution, and the oil marketing companies made nothing, which is why it's 0. So the cost components as a percentage, 45% went to taxes, and 52% was the actual cost of the fuel. It's important that you understand this dynamic so that you don't get the facts twisted, thinking that it's the OMCs who are being exploitative and are the ones making fuel expensive in Kenya. Because as you've seen, the taxes are what make the fuel expensive, which leads me to my next point. So what does the Russia-Ukraine war have to do with this? Now, one of the 9 taxes that you pay is something called the Petroleum Development Levy, and it's what is the subject of this debate. So each time you fuel, 5 Kenya shillings and 40 cents goes into a fund called the Petroleum Development Fund. So this tax isn't new. It's a tax you've been paying for about 20 years plus. And it's just that that amount changed at some point. So you've been paying 40 cents since around 1998, but from 2020 to date, you paid 5 Kenya shillings and 40 cents. Now, the main idea for charging this levy is so that should there be a price shock in the global price of crude oil or fuel, the government is going to be able to cushion you and I as the consumer. And it's called a shock because the price can go up or down in a very short time. Now, for this case, the government chooses money from that fund and pays it out as a subsidy to the companies that sell fuel to you to protect you from sudden and large rises in price. And this shock in price can be caused by a war or a revolution, or when demand is more than supply in the country that's importing the oil, or if a country that's a major exporter of oil experiences political instability, or if the fuel supply chain is inefficient, so the prices become higher. So let me demonstrate a practical example of a negative demand shock which has an effect on the price of fuel. Now, during COVID, the global price of fuel was at an all-time low, actually almost negative, because people's movement was zero. So there was no demand for fuel, and also production was very low. So remember my discussion on demand and disposable income. You make something have value when you can pay for it and you need it. Those two conditions have to exist at the same time. So during COVID, because I don't need fuel since I'm barely moving around, we're locked up in our houses, some people were also unwell, we couldn't work, production companies and manufacturing companies are not operating at optimum, and then fuel lost its value because people don't need it, so it became very cheap. But as soon as a vaccine was invented and people learned how to live with the virus, and people also became more confident and were able to move around more, there was now more demand for fuel, then fuel regained its value. And then the price of global crude oil started rising in 2021. That's what I'm calling forces of demand and supply. See, I told you economics is the decisions you make and how it affects everything else. Now, in 2021, as the global economy began to recover and we were back to business as usual, the global price of fuel also began to increase because now there was demand for it. And as a result, the landing cost of fuel into the country also increased, followed by a rise in the retail price of fuel, and then a rise in the price of basic commodities. And because of that, in April of 2021, the government started paying the subsidies. And for your information, they only started paying the subsidy to the oil marketers when Kenyans through social media complained that the cost of living had become too high, not because they are so nice. Then came the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, which pushed the price of fuel even higher. And likewise, in this case, the government says that since the war began, Kenyans would have had to pay 155 Kenya shillings per litre of fuel instead of 135 Kenya shillings that Kenyans had been paying up until April 2022. So in this case, the subsidy that the government supposedly paid was 20 Kenya shillings per litre of fuel, so that instead of paying 155, you pay 135. So I hope we're now clear on what a subsidy is. So here the fact is that the Russia-Ukraine war made the actual or the landing cost of fuel expensive, but it did not cause a shortage in Kenya. And the subsidy is being paid so that the OMCs get compensated, because now they have to buy the oil at an expensive price, but they also can't set the price to reflect the real buying costs. And you know that the profit margin is also controlled. And also so that we as the consumers don't get charged for that high price. Well, it sounds noble, right? Again, not quite. And let's see where the problems actually begin. Now, when you pay that 5 shillings and 40 cents, it's presumed to go into a fund called the Petroleum Development Fund to serve a time specifically like this, when there is a crisis either in Kenya or in the world, and it leads to a shock or a steep rise in the price of fuel, not for any other purpose other than that, or to upgrade the infrastructure in the energy and petroleum sector. However, there hasn't been any accountability in that fund, and because of that, it hasn't been clear how much has been collected so far, how much has been paid in subsidies and to who up to this point, and even what balances are owed. So in short, are you using the money for what it was meant for? So in fact, the Auditor General, Nancy Gathungu, raised an alarm that 18 billion Kenya shillings from the Petroleum Development Fund was used to pay for the SGR operating costs in 2020. And also about 2 billion was paid to different government agencies and 34 million paid to a private entity. And all this between the periods of 2020 and 2021. So this is a form of mismanagement because money wasn't used for what exactly it was meant for. So when the time to actually pay the subsidy comes, there's no money. So the fund has been operated in a very vague manner, no transparency, no accountability. So all these questions normally come up now when there's a crisis. So the question is, where did the money go? And to demonstrate where the rain started to beat us, the government was only able to subsidize fuel for the months of April to August of 2021. Then came September, there was no money. In a newspaper article by the Business Daily in September 2021, the Principal Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Muia, told the National Assembly Committee on Finance and National Planning, and I quote, "We received a request for 5 billion Kenya shillings in August, and that request was meant for stabilization of petroleum prices for the month of September. But unfortunately, the fund does not have that money, and consequently, that request has not been honored." So, is it then a surprise that 2 months later, in November of 2021, the oil marketing companies and other independent dealers raised an alarm that the government had only partially paid them the compensation, and then come December 2021 and January and February of 2022, there was also a delay, and then that's when the crisis happened. Stick around for the second part to see how this economic issue gets a bit more complicated. I've attached the references in the description box if you want to read more, including all the articles to see how all these things, the sequence of all these things. Don't forget to leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you so much for watching, and to finish this, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.